This is a Security Weekly production. This week on Security Weekly, Wade Baker will join us from Threat Connect. We'll do some listener feedback again because we just can't get enough of our listener feedback section. We're going to give some career advice from this lovely cast of characters. And we're going to talk about open source versus commercial security tools, if time allows. In security news this week, Google kills passwords on Android, steps for evaluating security vendors, APT strikes a 6-month-old Flash vulnerability, and more, so stay tuned. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly. Security Weekly is brought to you by the SANS Institute, the most trusted source for computer security training, certification, and research. Visit SANS.org to explore the full curriculum and latest training offerings. Onapsis, the leading provider of solutions to protect ERP systems from cyber attacks. Customers can secure their SAP and Oracle business-critical platforms from espionage, sabotage, and financial fraud risks. Visit them on the web at onapsis.com. Pony Express. Check out their line of penetration testing devices, including the Pwn Pad, the Pwn Phone, and the Pwn Pro. For enterprises, there's Pwn Pulse, providing continuous visibility into wired, Wi-Fi, and Bluetooth spectrums across all physical locations, including remote sites and branch offices. For all those hard-to-reach places, there's Pony Express. Visit them on the web at ponyexpress.com.
And here's your host. He's a man who I suspected had the hair sliding down his head onto his face. And, well, now I got to figure out where it slid to now because, wow. I mean, Paul Asadorian.
Welcome, everyone, to Security Weekly. This is episode 466 for May 26, 2016. I'm, of course, your host, Paul Asadorian, and we're here in G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, and I've got a cast of characters. Of course, Mr. Larry Pesce is here tonight.
Hey.
Welcome, Larry.
Thank you. As usual.
And Mr. Jack Daniel is here in studio.
What?
Yes. We've got Jack and Larry in studio.
It's been months.
Yeah, it's been.
We're like truly crossing the
streams. It's been too long.
And Mr. Jeff Mann is here as well. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you, Paul.
This
Great
is
to be here.
The smoking section
The
over
smoking
here.
section,
Jeff and I are in
yes.
the smoking section. I'm not wearing any shoes. I was sitting at my desk today, and I'm like, I can't figure out where the smell is coming from. Like, I'm getting rid of, like, the cups on my desk. I'm, like, looking under my keyboard. I'm like, did someone put tuna fish under my keyboard or something? And then I looked down at my shoe, and I'd stepped in dog poop.
And you're still sitting here worrying about smells.
And you're accusing me of farting in front of the fan and blowing it down.
Probably on my sock. That's what gonna take my socks off now.
Well, and last week, what was it? You went into your bag and like, what's this smell in my bag?
Yeah, there was. I did have an incident last week, and there was a rotten orange in my bag. It's like, oh my, what is that smell?
It turned into a lime. It was so green.
It was gross. Oh boy. Make sure you go to cloudsecurityworld.misty.com, Cloud Security World. Coming up here in Boston, I want to say it's June 5th through the 7th. Did I get it right? Nope, June 14th through the 15th even. Correction. That's right. Chris Valesic and Andrew Hay will be giving keynote talks. So make sure you go to cloudsecurityworld.misty.com. What else? I think that's it for announcements. Let's get right into...
Oh, I got a real quick one.
Larry, I thought you said you had an announcement.
Not really so much, but just one of those things that happened to remind me. I am teaching SANS SEC 617, the wireless course, coming up here a couple of times remaining this year. But the the closest one is in London this summer.
Ooh.
Yes. And would love to see folks in the class.
We're big in London. Got a lot of fans in London.
Huge in Japan.
I will I'll tease the crowd for you because I'll be in London at InfoSecurity Europe in 2 weeks. Ooh. Probably make an appearance at B-Sides London. Probably pop my head in over at Intelligent Defense. So, yeah.
Very cool.
Very nice.
Our feature interview for this evening is Wade Baker from Threat Connect, who's currently the Vice President of Strategy and Risk Analytics. He believes in improving information security starts with improving security information. Previously, he served as the Director of Cybersecurity and Strategy and Research at Verizon, where he worked on the DBIR. We welcome Wade to the show.
Hey, thanks, guys. Glad to be talking to you.
Yes, glad to have you on the show. Wade, how did you get your start in information security?
I think I took a path similar to a bunch of other people. I did the computer networking security route. A little bit more specifically, I was helping administer a Cisco networking academy, I don't know, late 99, 2000, something like that. And they needed someone to go take a PIX firewall course so we could teach that at the university, like a continuing ed thing. And that just got me interested in the security wing of networking from that point on.
Awesome. So tell us, so you worked at Verizon, and it says that you spearheaded the annual DBIR. What can you elaborate on that, Wade? How'd you get involved in this?
Yeah, so it was, I would say, interesting story. I don't know if it's interesting to everybody, but I was at Verizon working in several areas, from our managed security services back then to there was a forensics practice, and also like a security management program where we helped a bunch of organizations, figure out what they were doing security-wise. That's a highly simplified version of the story there. But anyway, one of the things that me and my team did was try to figure out and assess risk. And of course, that means you need to have some idea of what kind of bad things are happening and some sense of what things happen more often than others, and how organizations fail and that kind of thing. And so the DBIR was actually started out as a data collection effort. I heard some of the forensics team talking one day, and they were saying things like, hey, we've been seeing this increase lately in breach investigations, and we don't see this so much anymore. And I said, hang on a second, guys. Let's. Do you track any of this information? Are you charting this for every single investigation that you're doing? And the answer was no. And so I basically proposed. I said, I think this would be good information if we did this over time. I'm willing to do it. Throw me all the forensic reports. I'll dig through them, and I'll start to do this on an ongoing basis. And sorry to make an already long story not so short, but. It turned out that the results were really interesting, and that led to publication of the first DBIR back in 2008.
So I'm sure, Jack, you don't have any questions on the Verizon DBIR because you've always been the biggest fan.
I love the DBIR. I have had.
No, you do. You've had issues with it.
I've had some issues through the years, but I think it has held up well, and the first year it's like, this could turn into something cool, and by the second year it's like, yeah, this is cool stuff. And so I know that it must have been a lot of work to get that off the ground and get the people to understand the value inside Verizon, and then overcoming skeptics, because it turns out some of us, all of us in this industry are assholes at some level, but I'm glad you guys stuck with it. In spite of what I would consider a few missteps here and there, but overall, I think it's been valuable. And the thing that I think that came along a little later, when you guys published the methodology, and it's like
Varus,
yes. And I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that. But one of the things that I've found is when I talk about DBIR and why people should actually pay attention to it, as opposed to that other guy's reports that you can buy. There are too many people, but we all know who I mean. Is that there's this methodology behind it that's repeatable, and level 2 really requires answering a handful of multiple choice questions to get some really valuable data in your own environment. And once I explain that to people, they're like, oh, it's not just marketing. Because, we got to admit that half of all DBIR talks were, I pull 3 bullet points out of 90 pages, put them on a slide, and then say, now buy my shit.
Yeah, I totally get that. I will say that the people that worked on the DBIR, there were a lot of good people that kind of came in and out over the years that I was there, and there's some great people still there that did the one this year. I actually liked the work. I mean, they were not like marketing. I think the DBIR is probably unique in vendor reports in that nobody from marketing was allowed to touch the thing, and that was a incredible feat, I have to say. But it was the researchers that would analyze the data. Marketing did not get to say what points we emphasize and things like that. And I always appreciated that Verizon let that happen, and they paid salary of some good people to put that together. Now, we did go around and speak at sales events and other things like that. So we put in our legwork to make it worth it to them. But always appreciated that freedom. And Jack, I was also glad because we enjoyed doing that thing. We were trying in many ways to show that this kind of analysis that we're doing in the DBIR, there's really nothing incredibly spectacular about it. We take an incident, we say everything we know about who did it, we try to record what tactics and methods they used, what kind of systems that they exploited, what kind of data was compromised, if any, et cetera. And, you should be doing this too, because I've talked to an incredible number of organizations that would say, hey, this is really interesting report. What kind of magic are you doing? And I was always like, well, you could do this with every single incident that you have, and you do that over a year or two, and all of a sudden you'd have the same exact data set. So that was really the reason we published the Verus methodology behind it, just saying, hey, here's the data points we use, go forth and do this.
No, Wade, some will say that the DBIR is not a complete picture. And I think a large of that stems from there's a lot of people who take it as the complete picture of security and the internet today. But some will criticize the DBIR and say, well, it's not a complete picture because it's only Verizon customers. How do you address those comments?
I would say that's absolutely correct. In 2008, 2009, it was just Verizon customers, and it was just about 100 forensic investigations that Verizon would do. Now, there's obviously bias in that sample that we were able to share findings from. But that's the exact reason why we started working with the Secret Service and the Dutch High-Tech Crime Unit and the Australian Federal Police in the following years, and then it just kind of multiplied from that to where you had lots of security vendors. But the point was to, as best we could, through those kinds of data sharing partnerships, overcome the bias of a single organization's data set. And as far as that, I was always proud that we could have organizations. And in fact, I really liked it when Deloitte joined because they were a competitive forensic unit. And that was the first time a competitor gave their data to the DBIR. And I was like, man, that says we've hit another level, because we're accepting a competitor's data. They're willing to give it. And, it must be bigger than us at this point.
Now, one thing about the biases, too. One of the things that I have always liked about the DBIR is that right up front, it's like, we're aware of these shortcomings in our data. We know that we have this, we have the, selection bias, confirmation bias, and it's obvious that, it's people who have had to roll IR or something. But right up front, instead of, again, most reports that have a marketing spin that kind of leave you to infer when it's like, here's what we know is lacking, or here are potential problems in our data, and we think it's still potentially informative or still informative within these, but disclaiming the limitations instead of making the proclamation that the data is perfect, it's like, wow, they're actually being candid. That's kind of cool.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that observation. I mean, we tried to do that, and I think, again, it stems from the fact that the people behind it, we really actually enjoyed what we were doing, and we wanted to learn. We didn't want to just waste our time and write a report for marketing. I mean, every year we were seeking to turn the data a little bit different way and understand something more than we did the year before, and hopefully that shows. And even the small things like you mentioned, stating biases as best we could, but we always tried to when we showed a chart, show the size of that sample that data was based on, n equals 228 or whatever, because I see a bunch of reports out there that'll show some statistical breakdown of 9 things, and that just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But you're like, 80% of, this is this way. And it's just, it's BS.
One of the things that I'm not, and I don't believe they're including this in the report today, but I know previous reports have included a breakdown of how the breaches were discovered. And has that stopped in more previous years? Either that or I just missed it, but I don't think I did.
I know the last one I was on, which was the 2015, we had it in there. Now, it did shift from reporting that in aggregate across all breaches to reporting it for different kinds of breaches, because that statistic, for instance, was different when you were looking at something like espionage, where the time to discovery would be way long, and something like point of sale, where it would be shorter. So I'm pretty sure this year they reported it, but it might be one of those things that
they did it differently, and
they did it differently. One time it wasn't in aggregate.
Some years it's a lot of numbers, and other years it's more trying to tell the stories that the numbers tell, because there are only so many times you can tell people, which is one of my frustrations with DBIR and everything else in our industry. There are only so many times you can tell people. You really ought to use two-factor authentication.
Yeah.
Hey, maybe you should patch your shit.
Yeah.
I can tell you that there were conversations. All right, how are we going to rephrase this? And we actually had a thing called Code Blue It, where you just take a section, and you were tempted to just copy, paste, and use it again, but you had to paraphrase it somehow.
Right. And so the challenge is still the amount of external discovery versus internal discovery.
Every vendor on the planet, myself included, uses that in our sales presentations to talk about how.
The challenge of things like, but as Wade said, who finds. We may have been talking about a story before we started broadcasting that will sanitize to say there were people that got a call from people in uniforms and told they had lost a bunch of intellectual property to a foreign power. That took a really long time. On the other hand, the Visa or the card vendors or processors or Secret Service are often spotting card fraud in minutes, unless you use the credit cards I do, in which case you have to call them and tell them.
But for me, the compelling statistic that I've gleaned from the DBIR essentially backs my thing up that security is not really working for most organizations in terms of breach. In terms of breach discovery, it seems like there's a lot of products out there that are able to detect a breach.
Right. I think one of the challenges, though, is you have to remember that there's a bias, because you don't get into the DBIR unless you had at least an incident, if not a breach.
Yeah.
Right. So
good point.
They're not saying that those are rare, right? Not saying that people don't suffer them, but you have to have somehow come onto the radar of those. So it is not a report card of success, right? The folks that have done a stunning job. However, if we're candid, we can all learn from those things, and there are more people at that end of the security spectrum than there are at the other end of the. We got our stuff locked down. We discover stuff within hours. In those
but
companies.
But it's more important
exist.
to me how they discover it. And it was I think it was 2014 or something, Wade, and it was 3% were unknown. They didn't know how they discovered the breach. How is that even possible?
There are a few ways. So one of the things that really made the putting that report together harder is when we started sharing with a bunch of different organizations, because you kind of get, when I was looking at incidents that Verizon investigated, I could just go back to the original source or call the investigator and say, hey, man, what's up with this? This is not making sense to me. And clarify it. But when you're getting data from, the Malaysian CERT or something like that, you've got a language barrier, you've got all kinds of issues there. And some of those things you just can't clean up. So unknowns in every single category went up after we started doing that.
That makes a lot of sense.
Larry, Jeff, DBIR questions for Wade. You have to have at least one, Jeff. I know you do. I know I'm putting you on the spot.
What is the worst abuse of the DBIR that you've seen, or the thing that gets in your craw the most?
Good question. Good question, Jeff.
That is a good question. There was. I would have to say when someone would misinterpret something that was to me obvious or just flat out wrong. So I always enjoyed the fact that other vendors would take from the report and use it in their collateral and that kind of thing. I always thought that was kind of an honor to the report. But when someone would take a statistic and just and twist it to fit their story, and it absolutely didn't make sense, that always irritated me.
I bet.
Yeah, that was like, as I was joking before, the horrible sales presentations where there are 3 bullets out of context, not from the same chart, and it was basically this, and this without context. Now buy my shit. It's like, no,
that's not how you.
You know what you could do? You could tell the same thing, but you could actually dig into some of that data and tell some of the stories from the DBIR, and at the end say we could help you do better. And those, I try to do those myself. I've done those for years, but the ones where they're like, again, to pick on,
that's really
we all know who I'm making fun of. If you want to do that, just use what's his name's reports. Don't do that to the DBIR.
I have another just stupid question that I should know the answer to this. Is there any kind of overlap between the DBIR and the Verizon PCI report that gets published?
Kind of. I was involved in 2 of the PCI reports back in the day. And we used to feature a PCI section in the DBIR. So those 2 were the same data sets, but by and large, the PCI takes, the reports of compliance from the service that Verizon offered around PCI assessments, and DBIR is forensics. So there is no overlap there. And they tried to keep the as best as possible. I think they tried to keep the customers separate too, because there's a little bit of some issues. If you're like the PCI assessor and the one responding for the card brands after a breach, that's a conflict of interest.
Right, the PFI.
Yeah.
So I have a quick one on DBIR. What level of effort goes into creating each one of these? I mean, it's got to be painful and in a good way, but to get folks to understand what really goes into behind the scenes to make one of those happen. How long does it take? What's the level of effort?
It's a months-long process. So we had a calendar year that DBIR would usually publish in April or something like that. And then really you could take the summer off, and mid-fall you had to start. And when I say off, you're still doing your day job and other stuff like that. But it would start getting up in the fall because, if you think you've got several dozen organizations and you've got to scope out their data set, you've got to work with them to secure a way to share that data, you've got to bring it on, you've got to remind them 50 times that the deadline is here for them to submit their information. And so finally you hope to get most of the data in about December, but it really goes through January. And so, we always shot to have the data analyzed in February, and you write in the few weeks in February, and then it goes into, the land between, getting ready to pub and all that kind of thing. So it kind of is a long effort, and it's hard, and there's some, people work a lot on it. And over the years, it grew because, just the relationship management of all the contributors is, really, there were some times I felt like I'm doing a salesperson's job because for every single one of those, I meet with them and I assess what kind of data do you have, and let's see how this fits in here, and what format do you collect it in, and if you were to export that from your database or whatever, what would it look like, and how can we transfer it? So you're like, and there is an engagement for every single one of those. It was not easy.
Ouch.
Wait, I want to transition into threat intelligence and.
All right.
I want to apologize for you got your work cut out. Because we've been, not just us, but a lot of people in the security community are pretty hard on threat intelligence. So I have a quote, and I actually got Marcus's permission to read this on the show. I have a quote from Marcus Ranum, who says, "So the value of threat intelligence is both slight and fleeting, although it can be expensive. In other words, threat intelligence is similar to American beer." Also, Jack Daniel has been noted to be quoted as saying on the show, "Most threat intelligence is a threat to our intelligence." My question to you, Wade, why does threat intelligence have such a bad rap? I know the answer, but I want you to speak to our audience on that point.
Okay, so it's a good question. Before I answer that, I wanted to I'm going to give you a transition from the DBIR to the realm of intelligence, which may form a basis for some conversation. You mentioned the discovery methods.
Yes.
There was a time a couple years ago when I was kind of depressed about that nothing was discovering breaches. And there was one upward trend. And basically that single upward trend was external organizations that noticed the victim, communicating outbound with some kind of command and control server would notify the victim. And sometimes that was the kind of ambulance chasing stuff, but sometimes it was legit. But basically, that was having some kind of indicators of compromise and knowing that was a bad thing and notifying the organization. So I'm not saying that is equivalent to threat intelligence, but I started to notice a trend of, I think there's some value here into knowing artifacts of bad things and monitoring for that and looking for signs of compromise. And that was kind of my kick over into that's pretty useful for discovery. So then to get over to your question on threat intelligence, I really have no argument there. I mean, in truth, one of the reasons that Threat Connect exists is because threat intelligence is challenging. It's you can't go to a source and just turn it on and take everything it says as to heart, and you have to blend it together. I guess I view intelligence sometimes differently than other people do. I don't view it as a set of prescriptions. So I'm going to take this and now go do something, set a rule on my firewall or wipe that system or whatever. But it's a piece of information that helps me make a decision. And I want to take that, which maybe it's crappy information, but if I assemble that with a bunch of other semi-crappy information and maybe a couple good information sources, then the sum total of that is something I can use.
It's refreshing to hear you say that, because there is the perception that, I know what I need to do to be secure. I just subscribe to a threat intelligence feed, and then I take all that and I go into my network and I like secure stuff, and it tells me everything, and I'm like, no, that's not how it works. It's not how it works, right?
Yeah.
This reminds me.
What is there for? Yeah,
go ahead,
level of maturity? I think that's part of the thing. Is that the organization, to be able to use threat intelligence, if it's good threat intelligence, it's one of those you must be this stall to ride this ride.
Channeling Michael Sant'Arcangelo.
I was getting ready to do that.
Since you're living that world, Wade, do you see that well? That not all organizations are really prepared to use data, even when you give them good data, or they acquire it, however they get it.
Yeah, I think there's ranges, right? So a lot of people make a big distinction between threat data and threat intelligence, and okay, I agree that there is a distinction. But one of the things I don't agree with is that threat data is dismissible and doesn't have any value. For instance, if you gave me a really good, vetted, high-quality feed of URLs or malware hashes, I could probably detect some compromises using that information. And those things are readily able to be plugged in and imported into lots of different types of systems and defensive products, and so are accessible to lesser mature organizations. Whereas when you get into more higher levels of intelligence and human intelligence and really refined stuff that is more of a story about a set of actors and all of their campaigns and exploits, I do think you need a little bit more maturity to be able to figure out, all right, there's there's that intelligence. Now, what in the world do I do with that? Is it useful for detection? Is it useful only for retroactive type hunting stuff? Is it useful just so I can inform my boss about potential threats and what's going on? It really depends on the use. And I think a lot of where people go wrong with threat intelligence is just assuming that the only use case is real-time detection, in a SIEM environment or blocking in a firewall. And, that's really not the best use case at all.
Yeah, I speak with some organizations that spend a lot of time subscribing to multiple feeds and either A, manually taking all that data and then trying to do stuff about it in their network, or even B, like writing scripts and stuff to go figure out what's important to them and then trying to go track it down. And I think the point that Wade made that I want our listeners to know is on the lower end of the scale, so I'm short to ride the ride, right? And you take those feeds or a feed and you plug it into your existing security control solutions, right? Like Tenable.
But if you're low end on the scale, are you likely to have anything to plug it into?
Well, I hope you have something.
Yeah, you probably have something.
Probably something. Something.
Yeah.
If you don't have anything, yes, then you're too short to ride the ride.
I wanted to, in attempting to answer the original question, Wade, just simply how would you define threat intelligence?
That was one of my questions. What is threat intelligence? So I've got a list of is it bad IP addresses? Is it events happening on other
Stop
people's
feeding
networks?
him information. Just let him spontaneously answer.
I'll shut up now.
How do you define threat intelligence?
So I have a rather broad definition of intelligence, and it's really information on threat actors and methods and activities.
Okay.
So some people will. I think I heard you mentioned a feed of IP addresses, which no, I wouldn't say that fits the definition of threat intelligence. I think it is part of data points that can, when put with other things, become threat intelligence. Like if I'm trying to get intelligence on a set of adversaries, I want to know what network infrastructure they have control of. And one way I know that is IPs and domains and other things that they have been under their control in the past.
Okay.
No, you have to break it down to more than just a list of bad IP addresses or a list of MD5 hashes of. I mean, that's, like you said, part of it, right?
Yeah.
But you even, in just talking about that list, expanded upon, well, it's not just a list of IP addresses, but the next level is knowing which threat actor group is associated with some of those IP addresses or domain names.
Yeah, I mean, it's really like human intelligence. I mean, if you're collecting intelligence on a person, you don't just use date of birth. That's just a data point in someone's profile that you might be building out when you're collecting intelligence on a potential threat, along with a bunch of other things. We would not take and start making rules that restrict everybody that was born on a certain day, just because a set of bad guys that we know were.
Right.
And I don't know why some people sort of just change the way they think about that when we're talking network intelligence.
Well, I think it probably has something to do with a lot of marketing hype by companies that are trying to sell product. So I wanted to tell a quick story because I have a DoD background, Wade, and many, many years ago, probably in the late 80s, I was getting ready to go on a trip overseas to what was then West Germany. And the organization where I worked had a threat office. And I think I was leaving on a Friday afternoon, going to take a red eye over to somewhere, let's say Munich. And my boss was in a panic trying to track me down because they had gotten a call from the threat office and wanted to get the word to me that there was a high-level alert status for West Germany for terrorist activity. So he wanted to make sure I had that information. So I got that information, and my first question was, and what do I do with this information? Am I going? Yeah. Am I not going? Am I, am I altering my behaviors in any way? What am I supposed to do with this? And nobody had any answer for that. They just, we just wanted to let you know.
Thanks.
I'm so I didn't tell my wife that until years later. By the way, honey, before I went on that trip, I was under a high-level threat warning. So I assume threat intelligence has something to do with threat being part of the risk equation and trying to come up with some kind of useful data to apply to whatever equation people think of. Is that accurate?
I would say that is accurate. Kind of going back to the DBIR, I was always interested in collecting threat information. Now it was incident and breach based for that data set, but things that happen in the past, I can gather information on that, and hopefully that helps me make better decisions and take more justified actions in the future, right? To improve my security posture. And I think threat intelligence has a similar role, except it's sped up. I'm not analyzing incidents that happened 6 months or a year ago. I'm trying to take hopefully very near time information and make decisions and certain actions on them. Some of those automated. So yes, I agree. If all you're doing is supplying information, you could tell a really cool story, and you're kind of like, okay, well, what's up with that? Somebody mentioned a while ago, I do think that vendor marketing has muddied the waters here a little bit, because there are some really neat reports out there that are published, and a lot of big to do about here's some intelligence, et cetera, and then I think a lot of people kind of look at that and wonder, okay, that's cool, have a better idea about that adversary, but what in the world do I do with that? And it's a problem, because
wait, along those lines. So what it sounds like to me is that the data that you get from threat intelligence, or the information, is not always actionable. So how do you best determine which pieces are actionable for you? Because I think the perception that the vendors have painted out there is that all threat intelligence data is actionable, and that's certainly not the case. In Jeff's story.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, that's one of the reasons why I like what Threat Connect is doing, because our value proposition is not that we are the smartest organization ever. We have the best intel analysts. Just trust us. When we give you intelligence, it's solid. Don't doubt it. Just go forth and do. We have the ability to say, no, we're a platform where we take all of those sources, free and paid and otherwise, and we pull all of that so that you can make a very well-rounded, hopefully multi-perspective informed picture of what's going on. You're worried about a certain threat. Well, a bunch of vendors are going to have something to say about that. Sometimes they say conflicting evidence about that. Sometimes, someone will give, if you've got a threat, there might be vendors that supply a bunch of IP addresses, and some that supply a bunch of domains, and others that supply a little bit more of the human side. And neither one of them has the complete picture for me to take an action. But it's the process of assembling all that together and figuring out what to do. And that's the challenge, right? That's what we're trying to help with. But that's what you need to do. You can't trust any single source. It's that multi-perspective, and sometimes you are in the process in the middle there, and it's like anything else. Again, I'll use kind of human parallels. If you heard a rumor from one source bad-mouthing a friend, right, you're not just going to trust them. You're going to kind of go, hey, man, have you heard anything about this? What's up with that? What did you hear about that thing? And you're going to get multiple perspectives on whatever that fact is, and from that you'll figure out whether to believe it or discredit it. And that's a lot of what intelligence is sifting through a bunch of noise and trying to figure out what's signal.
Yeah, there was a study that came out, I don't know how long ago, but it said that they analyzed threat intelligence feed and figured out there was only like a 1 or 2% overlap in all the feeds, to kind of speak to what you're talking to. So how do we combat that? We did some of that in the 2015 data breach report before I left, and there's been some others that have studied that. And sometimes the overlap on inbound types of intelligence are different than outbound. But I think by and large, it's saying that you can't rely on any single source. If it's really true that I'm getting completely different lists of bad things from a bunch of different sources, then it must be that
no single source has everything, right? That low overlap is just indicating that there's a ton of bad stuff out there. And in order for us to get as much of an idea of what's out there, we've got to assemble all the sources. And I think that's kind of where we are. There's a lot of vendors in the space that are creating good threat information for what they see, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, you're making the assumption, though, that all the data that you're getting from the various sources is good data.
That is true. And it's not. And you can see that. You can actually measure conflict. You can start to see when that indicator, whatever it is, shows up in this source, and they're the first reporter, and then it starts showing up in all of these others. Some of them you can tell are just ingesting from other sources like that. And it's kind of interesting because, some things are just will take anything and pass it on. Others will refine it a little better. And I think that is that's just a maturity process, right? We've been in this threat intelligence game for a long time, depending on where you sit. But from a vendor and industry perspective, I still think it's kind of nascent overall. And because of that, you've kind of got to accept a little more noise, and it makes the job of finding signal harder.
Well, we've been in the business of it longer than we've had the term for it.
Mm-hmm. That is,
we just had at some point the terminology was coined. If I may ask a question, and this is just to get your opinion.
Sure.
I was at a conference earlier this week that was not a security conference; it was a fraud conference. It was for primarily e-commerce card not present merchants for the retail industry. All the people there are totally immersed in fraud, and when you talk to them about network security or information security, they tend to say, "Oh, that's not us. That's a different group in our organization. We're the fraud people." Yet I know that within the retail, the payment industry, the card brands, payment processors, they've invested billions, if not trillions, in fraud detection techniques. And I'm wondering if you've seen that, if you see an overlap, or if you see this as a way to bridge the gap between the security group within companies and the fraud group within companies. I'll leave it at that. And what do you think?
I absolutely think there's overlap. In working with organizations like the Secret Service that have a very, very well developed fraud unit, and then they have the cyber network type investigative units too. Those guys and gals switch back and forth, and they're different skill sets certainly. But as far as what you're looking for, there's a ton of skills that can be passed back and forth. So, for instance, with fraud, and I think fraud is a good example because it is fairly mature in the grand scheme of things compared to some of the things that I've seen on the network threat intelligence side. But still, at the end of the day, it's transaction based.
Right.
You have certain percentage of things that are legitimate. Overwhelming majority of transactions are legitimate. There's some subset that is malicious or illegitimate, and figuring out how to determine which is which is what fraud patterns analysis has been doing for years, and very, very applicable.
It's very mature, and one of the reasons I ask is I've started to hear in our industry in the last 6, 8 months, 9 months. The term user behavior analysis, like trying to make that the next new thing, and I immediately go back to fraud. And I said, well, that's essentially what fraud detection is, and those guys are. I was at a fraud summit maybe a year and a half ago, and there was somebody there from Visa saying that they. All the efforts that they put into fraud, they've got the losses to fraud down to less than 5 cents for every $100 transacted against a Visa card. Yep. And I'm like, would I spend a nickel for every $100 I'm transacting as a merchant to not have to worry about security and compliance and all the other things I have to do if there's can be something there that's driving it down to that.
Why isn't Michael on tonight so he can say chip and pin just to wind it up
here? Chip and pin, multi-factor authentication. You're done.
No, it's a good point. I You mentioned user behavior analysis. I have heard. I don't have any experience with it. It's not my area of expertise, but I have heard that similar to fraud, there's a relatively low level of false positives in those breed of technologies, and I think it maybe because they do draw rather heavily from fraud and pattern analysis and other things like that.
Right.
And a lot of those solutions actually integrate threat intelligence as well.
Yep.
A lot of, I shouldn't say, some people I speak with tend to, I think, go with this perception that threat intelligence is where I should be spending the majority of my time, right? I should subscribe to all these feeds. And I feel like that the people that think that way, they lose focus on actually looking inside their own networks. Like they're relying on the data that's coming from other people's networks, but they're not focusing on what's on their network. So how do you balance, Wade, between threat intelligence and looking for stuff in your own network?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, actually. And in fact, I always, when I talk to organizations and customers about this, try to get them to, within their definition of threat intelligence, yes, there's the external stuff that we think of when we think threat intelligence, but the internal information and intelligence is equally, if not more, valuable and important. And in fact, if you had to say where to start, I'd say start internal. And I don't know why exactly that doesn't happen.
Because it's hard.
It is hard, and I think it is kind of similar to what I was finding when I was talking about breach information. Organizations would say, "Hey, DBIR is great. What kind of crazy analysis do you do?" And I'm like, "Well, why don't you just start collecting the exact same stuff on your internal incidents? You can do this." And for some reason, I think organizations just don't like the introspective analysis. Maybe it's because security is hard, day-to-day job. It's in the trenches, fog of war, all that kind of stuff. And you kind of just, hey, that's what I pay other people to do, is to kind of give me, they're the smart people. They tell me what's going on and what's relevant out there, and I'll do that. And I think it's a mistake.
Well, I think a lot of it comes down to the interactions between people in the organization, because it's hard to collect all that intelligence internally, because now I got to go to my systems administrators. I got to have them turn on this logging. I got to go to this team in the database because I need a database to store this stuff in. I got to go to my network team because I want NetFlow data from them, so they got to do stuff. And I think,
and by the way, when they see you coming, they turn and run.
Yeah,
nobody talks to you.
People are frustrated, so like, I'll just go external now, and that's where I'll put my focus. That's just my thought on that.
Again, I feel like I'm just agreeing with you just because, but I agree. The biggest frustration, in fact, that I've had in the past roles is the internal people dynamics. The fact that there would be a forensic investigator on the ground working a case, and they would need some kind of information or intelligence, and they email me, "Hey, do we know anything about this? Here's some indicators of compromise," and then look it up, and then you've got now I need to go involve the network team, pull information. I want to take that, if it is bad, and transfer it over to the SOC so that it's being monitored for, and other things like that. And man, that is frustrating and messy in most places. And I think it does kind of just, you're like, okay, forget it. That's too hard.
Well, on the flip side of that, I also, some people will say, well, I think it's great that I would call it higher level threat intelligence, where you're describing how a specific group is targeting a specific industry with some of the specific malware. Yeah. And some people say, yeah, that's great, but I can just go look on my own systems and I can find malware faster than relying on an external report. So how do you deal with that type of user who's the complete opposite of the previous persona?
Yeah, I think it's a mix. Again, there's different use cases, right? If I am looking in my own environment and trying to find compromised systems and things like this, yes, I'm going to find a different set of whether they're indicators or artifact signatures, whatever it is, might be applicable to that. But those external reports, which may or may not be applicable to me, can still inform what I'm doing, because maybe I find a direct match, and that's simple. But it's also a notion of, well, how are things working? What types of systems are certain types of adversaries targeting, because maybe I can spend a little bit more of my time searching in that area, and or configure rules differently in different zones. And so it's a blend. It's take what you can from the outside, take what you can from the inside, and use that. And I think, again, that's the idea, is a more informed way of managing security in your organization. And if threat intelligence can do that, and I think it can, then that's a net win, because I've seen a lot of dumb security over the years, and
Say it isn't so.
So I have two thoughts.
Go ahead, Jeff.
One, he said use case, and that should be like the new cyber. Drink. But
Cheers.
I agree with you, but I think we in the industry tend to have this mythical vision of what organizations are like, even having this level of sophistication, even having a security organization, yet alone having the level of sophistication and time it takes to do what you're describing. Most companies don't have that, so they're looking for something that they can
Latch onto,
plug and play.
Yeah,
Something.
I don't disagree.
It's that maturity thing again.
Yeah, and I don't think quote doing threat intelligence is for everyone. Not everyone can afford experts that know how to do all the varying roles that a threat intelligence analyst needs to do, and maybe they turn to a managed service provider or something else for that kind of thing.
But I think a lot of people, I see Star Wars in the background, which kind of along those lines you're saying, Jeff, right?
Yeah.
It's like in the new Force Awakens, where he's like, well, we'll just use the Force. And Han's like, no, that's like not how it works.
That is awesome.
Very relevant to this conversation, right? Like, that's not how it works,
blog
dude.
post soon, I think.
Yes.
It's been interesting to see the time go by, because I've noticed that Darth Vader's head was there, and then the sun came across Darth Vader's head and creeped up, and now it's off of Darth Vader's head again.
That's awesome.
So so at the risk of setting you up, or your company up,
They're a sponsor too, by the way, so proceed.
Well, we were talking about the need to be able to do the threat intelligence internally, and we were actually talking earlier today, does internal still exist versus external? But do you offer a methodology, a way of letting customers do the threat intelligence collection internally? Do you have a platform that enables that?
Yeah. So,
why don't you tell us about it?
Just on that note right there, one of the things that I'm very interested. Again, I'm a measurer. I like studying things and kind of figuring out what's what. But we can pull a lot of organizations that use Threat Connect. Step one will be, all right, let me aggregate a bunch of external sources of threat data and intelligence, whether they're free or paid or they're participating in ISAC or whatever it is. They have all of this stuff from the outside. But we and then the first thing that they will connect to internally is their SIEM, probably. I mean, not every customer is the same, but that's probably what they're doing. So they can take all this external stuff and then start monitoring for it in their SIEM. And we're doing things in the middle of that to reduce the noise and amplify the signal. But fast forward. We tell them all right, don't just stop there. Don't just take from the outside and throw it into your SIEM. Let's get recursive back into Threat Connect from your SIEM, so that if you ever do see something that hits, that information passes back into Threat Connect, or high priority alerts and things like that. And you can measure, am I getting better detection efficiency from internal or outside? And if you want to break it down, which sources or which types of sources are providing for me the best increase to my detection capability. And things like that. I haven't seen a lot of studies measuring that. I tweeted out some time ago. I hear a lot about how context is key to threat intelligence, and I agree with that. I think context is very important. But does a ton of context around a malicious URL improve detection capability? I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe the fact that someone says, I'm seeing this is malicious right now leads to a detection and it's provably malicious. Maybe that's good enough, So, but you can measure these things. And I personally am excited about being able to measure that exact thing. Am I getting better efficiency from inside, outside? What types of sources, what types of indicators, all of that kind of thing.
Wade, are you ready to play 5 questions with Security Weekly?
Sure.
3 words to describe yourself.
I would go with curious and analytical and creative, I think.
If you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice?
All right, so I know you guys asked this, and I've put some thought into it. I would go with the gravity gun from Half-Life 2 because, then there is no forensic evidence that ties you to the actual murder weapon. You could just, throw a knife at them or a barrel or whatever it is, and you're clean.
I like it. If you wrote a book about yourself, what would the title be?
Again, I have thought about this over the years, and I think I like song titles as things. So I would go with "Breaches Ain't Shit, but Holes and Tricks." I think would be fantastic. Fantastic title.
Wade is clearly the most
have a
entertaining.
winner.
That one wins one internet. That one wins one internet.
Wade, oh, shit. In the popular game of Ask Grabby Grabby, do you prefer to go first or second?
I guess I'll choose first. Set the tone.
Choose 2 celebrities to be your parents.
So I don't know how this works physically, but I would like to be the offspring of Han Solo and Chewbacca and just fly around in the Millennium Falcon. My childhood.
That's awesome.
Or
Or at least drive around a car in the mask.
My mouth is agape. I'm not sure how to respond to this.
Wow. Two of the coolest characters.
What was that? What was that science fiction movie where Lou Gossett Jr. was an alien that? Never mind.
God. Now I have to go look that up now.
I know.
All right, you know what? I'm going to do that during the break because we're running short on time.
Yeah,
we're over time.
We'll come back
Wade,
with the answer.
Thank you very much
during News of the Week
appreciate
for
it, guys.
appearing on the show. Make
Thanks,
sure you
Wade.
visit Threat Connect is, of course, a sponsor. ThreatConnect.com/Security Weekly.